the most successful people in the world are not the ones that walk in and get it. They're the ones who raise their hand and ask for help.
Yes.
Because they're not worried about what someone's going to think. They're
Yes.
worried about themselves
Yes.
and how to do a better job. And that comes across, and they get further. But it's about nurturing that. So, even as an employer, being happy when someone asks you for help.
Yeah.
How do you receive
Yes.
How do you receive that? Do you take that personally, like, oh, this person's supposed to know that? Or do you say, maybe I didn't explain that well enough.
Right.
Let me try another way.
Right. And that's like a key element in leadership. Like being a good leader is being able to put, as a manager, putting the mirror back to yourself.
Yeah.
What can I do to improve this? What was my part in this?
Right.
Hey everybody, welcome to Finding the Upside. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm excited to have in the studio my special guest, Annika Ahlstrom. Welcome, Annika.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So happy to have you here in studio with me. So today we are going to be talking with Annika about ADHD and executive function, and I'm going to give just a brief bio about Annika and then turn it over to her. So I've known Annika for many years. We've actually worked together. My son has ADHD, has been diagnosed with ADHD since the age of 12, and I met this beauty, and I've been working with her for the last, I guess, 8 years, right?
Yeah.
Wow. It's
Long
been
time.
a long time. So Annika generally has been working in education, but specializing in working with kids with specifically ADHD and executive function. I won't give all of that away. I'll let her speak to that. But she is transitioning into working independently in her own business and specializing in that field, as well as expanding to starting to work with adults. So I'm going to just turn it over to you to talk a little bit about your journey and just about how you came to where you're at here now.
So my journey really in education started in public education. Mm-hmm. So I've been in public schools and I've been in private schools. And when I was in private school, I was at a particular school for 8 years. I was the learning specialist, K through 12. And it was really my job to look at evaluations as they came through and to see if the child was appropriate for our school and we had the supports necessary. And many students had the diagnosis of ADHD. And we're talking now 11 years ago, I started seeing executive function disorder in these evaluations.
Yeah.
And I had no idea what this was at the time. And so it was always my job at the school if we didn't have something in-house, which I was it. So
Right.
I was covering K through 12. And I knew I didn't know what this was. So I knew I couldn't support someone who had this. And so I started looking into it and found that there was not a single person in the state of New Jersey at the time who offered this specific support. So not a specialist. And I learned what executive function disorder is and was, and found that, I was really interested in pursuing learning, all about it. And I've always been obsessed with the brain. Mm-hmm. And so I go to a lot of workshops and conferences, and I ended up finding a woman by the name of Mary D. Sklar. She's based out of Portland, Oregon, and I just loved the way she approached it. I love the program that she taught, Seeing My Time, which is a program I still very much use in my work. And I trained with her. I took 2 different courses with her, and then finally ended up doing a full training to become one of actually her coaches, which I did for a while. And on the, I started offering this in the school that I was currently working in, and then found the need was so great that I was being referred by, therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists, for other families outside of my school. So I ended up working for the past 9 years now, on the weekends and in the evenings. So I was never really off. And that's, I think, I met you and your son in those early days.
You did.
And I just love it. And now my practice has grown. I think COVID really made it explode because all of our routines and structure fell apart as families. And so my business really just blew up. So I've just recently gone off on my own.
Congratulations.
Thank you. In fact, my launch date is really tomorrow, August 1st. So I'm
Wow.
really
Awesome.
excited. Yeah. And so I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I'm glad you're here as well. And it's I have so much I want to follow up on with that, and it's funny because actually the center that we went to and the doctor that we went to is how we got referred to you. So, and through this whole journey from my own personal experience, and being close to it is the more you learn, the more you learn. It's like a discovery every single day, and I do like that you mentioned because I think that's so critical right now with what's happening, and because there's a lot of attention and talk about this right now, about structure falling away, and how that happened in COVID, not just for kids,
No, for everyone.
but for adults. And then people started to struggle and then realize, what's up here? So I think understanding that, whether you're a child, whether you're an adult, and how that shows up for you is important to recognize. But I also wanted to point to and follow up because a big part of the program and what you did with us, which I think is so critical, is, and part of the SCLAR method, is helping people to understand their brain and that there's nothing wrong with them. It's just that their brain works differently. Can you talk about that part of it and why that's so important for people, children or adults, to understand?
Well, I think it's crucial because when young people, and their parents typically come to me, there's their self-worth, their self-esteem has really taken a hit. They've been made to feel that there's something wrong with them. They're flawed in some way, and nothing could be further from the truth. And that's really how I start my sessions, is that connection with the child or the adult to say, there's nothing wrong with you. You have everything you need. You just don't have a system yet. And the difficulties, the challenges you're having is because your brain is wired differently. So it takes away the blame and the shame, and it makes it, gives a little distance so that you're able to say, this is nothing that is my fault. It's just a difference, and I need some tools and strategies to reach my potential. And I think once that lands with the person, whether they're young or an adult, it changes something in them, and it opens up something in them where they can now hear, because they're often very closed, because it's very hard to feel like there's something wrong with you over and over and over again. And so that acceptance, that education, let's learn about your brain. And when I work with families, what I love most about this work is that it helps communication. So that parent and child often, it's like this level of conflict that's crazy. And I always joke with families when they first start with me, and I say, you don't seem like that kind of families, but most families that I work with have a lot of conflict. And of course, everybody laughs because, of course, they have conflict. And I say, really, it's about a lack of understanding. So what you're going to do is you're going to look at your brain, and your parents are going to look at their brains, and the child starts to see, this is not just me. This is everyone has these challenges. It doesn't, and everyone can stand to get better. I'm also very open about the fact that I myself have executive function challenges. I don't have a diagnosis of ADHD, but I very much have executive function challenges.
I do as well.
Yeah. And so I'm very open about that every time I teach this, I get a little bit better. And so there's a lot of joy in the work I do because I see such progress. I see such hope. And for children and adults, that's huge.
Yeah, and I think for sure what I've seen, not just with my own son and with children and in the education system in the world, is this norm, this system of, or this idea of norm, and him sitting outside of it. That critical factor of them understanding that there's nothing wrong. Sometimes it takes a while for them to own that, and as a child or as an adult, because we are bombarded with messages and being forced to fit in ways that we might not necessarily fit in. We might need something different. We might need something outside of that structure, whether it's in the workplace, whether it's in school, whether it's in society. That just doesn't work for us. So how do you approach it from people who are struggling to kind of own that it's okay because they're being bombarded with those messages every single day.
And I think, you bring up a good point. It's every single day. It's all the time.
Yeah.
And then they're starting to hear it from their parents because
Yeah.
the parents, and it's fear-based. Because I say to families, this comes from a place of just wanting your child and wanting yourself to be, everyone wants to be successful,
Yes.
right? But it becomes very scary when you start to think, is my child going to make it? Is my child going to be able to get through school? Are they going to be able to get a job? He can't get up for, class. How's he going to make it to a job, right? And so we start to get very scared. And that's where the conflict comes in because it's a lot of fear. And so what I try to do is I keep saying this is a developmental progression, right?
Yeah.
So I think schools, especially in the United States, really, it's very traditional, it's very conservative, and it takes a long time for things to change. And so when you're in middle school, now you're supposed to be able to move from class to class with your materials. And so there's this expectation that's just, it's out of whack.
Yes.
It's not appropriate. And
Yes.
every child develops differently. I always tell parents, everyone will pop, but they'll pop at different times. And we have to be open to that. We have to be encouraging. We cannot be putting children in a place where if you're not doing it by this age, there's something wrong with you. No. And I also look at, children as to say everyone has challenges, but there's also all these strengths that come
Yes.
with,
Yeah.
these challenges.
Yeah.
Out of the box thinkers.
Yes.
That's what we need in the world. For in every type of, employment we can think of, we need out of
Yes.
the box thinkers.
Yeah. Well, and it's what's interesting about, as you are migrating into working with more adults, because I think that this is something that really could help adults that, whether we had the diagnosis or don't, or, back in when I grew up, really wasn't a lot of talk about this. But I know myself, there's certain things that I need to do differently. And as you said, you need to do differently. And I think a lot of adults could that resonate with them. But in the workplace now, there's this talk of really embracing the neurodivergence, right? Neurodivergence is just a term to kind of celebrate the differences and celebrate the different strengths and that's what should have been happening anyway. But really realizing that a deficit in one area has a strength in another. So how do we use those things and how do we celebrate that? So I think that that's going to be an important point. And I've only recently been opened up to the fact that this pathological label of ADHD, right? Disorder, deficit, all these negative diagnoses really don't help because they are negative. There's negative connotation based with it. So really understanding the differences and celebrating that, I think, will be really important. What are your thoughts about even some of the work that you've done as you started to work with adults, being able to help adults understand and advocate for themselves in the workplace if their brains are wired differently than others?
Well, I think it's really interesting because, if I take it back to working with families, because that's sort of where it all began for me. Parents will, at first, when I have a free consultation phone call with them just to make sure they understand and any questions they have. And parents will often be a little surprised that they're going to be a part of this process.
Yes.
But what's so interesting is at the end of the program, I do a survey, and often parents will say, I had no idea how much I was going to learn and how much I was going to apply this to my work, of course, in the home, but also to my work. And so I was working with a family this past weekend, and I was teaching the 3 steps in asking for help. And the child, was really kind of nervous, but said, I'm really going to try this. And the mom said, I'm going to try this at work because there's so many things that I don't feel like I can ask about, and now I'm empowered to ask those questions. And I was never taught this as a child, and I was very quiet and shy, and I'm going to take a risk. And I think, first of all, that's amazing that an adult discovers that they can apply this in the workplace, but it's also how wonderful for that child to see that mother is modeling
it.
This is not just school skills. These are life skills. This is my mom is working on this too. This now normalizes that everybody's trying to get better at this stuff. And that's awesome. And that, I think, is also why this program is so strengthening, because it bonds the family members instead of, being at odds.
Yeah.
Right?
For sure, yeah, and that's interesting about the parent who said that, the mom who said that, because I was recently in a class, and there was a gentleman who was kind of expressing that in the materials, there was a something that was missing for him, and a lot of people started to voice and kind of, I don't want to say shame him, but almost negate what he was saying. And I had to say, everybody learns differently. And this is great advice, but let's honor the fact that he might need something different, and let's give him ways that he can get that, even if it's not changing the material. Obviously, the class, people who did the class, would be great if they took that into consideration. And I know myself in training, you need to make sure that you're kind of speaking to all different types of learners, the way people learn, the way people hear, visual, audio, kinesthetic, all those things. But he wasn't getting what he needed, and he was trying to advocate for that. And that got met with a little bit of dissent until people understood, oh, okay, he just needs something different than we need.
Right.
And I think that all of us kind of understanding that in any realm, whether that's in school or in work or in life, I think that that's really key.
It is really key. And I think as well, I worked with a family recently whose mother is, an executive in a corporation, and she said, I'd love for you to come and just work with some of my managers, because I think for them to understand this and for it to be reinforced in the workplace is so important.
Yep.
So, I think this work is needed everywhere.
For sure. For sure.
Yeah.
And, a lot of the talk about now, creating safe psychological spaces at work and, inclusiveness. And I know there's a contingent that's poo-pooing that a little bit, but DE&I efforts kind of miss the neurodivergence a little bit because, again, it's this is how we do things, kind of not. And I think I have hope, because I've heard a lot of talk and been reading a lot of things, that there's more conversation. We're having these conversations. These terms are there. But yes, having companies understand, okay, somebody, because they, have to manage their time differently, have to use something different than a phone calendar or whatever, doesn't mean that there's something wrong with them. It's just that's what they need, and being able to be flexible enough. And I think we're at a tipping point now, because with COVID, people realizing certain things, number one. With coming out of that and this flexibility that is really necessary, and people are recognizing now, and hopefully employers are getting the message, some are, that we really have to craft things that are working to get the best out of each individual, not this cookie cutter method. So I have hope that that's there, but I hope more companies invite this education in, because I think it's critical.
I agree. And I agree that it's not about checking a box, right?
No.
I see this in schools all the time, and that's why I was so lucky that I worked in schools for as long as I did, both public and private, because I understand from the vantage point of the teacher and the parent and the child, which I think is critical to what I do. But, some schools and administrators will just, well, we need to do this and check a box. And it's yeah, but okay, you checked a box, but did it really land?
Right.
Were the teachers really trained?
Right.
So we have to be careful there too, that it's not just checking a box, but it's actually implementing these things and really training people to understand.
Well, and that, I'm glad you said it that way, because that's been a huge frustration for me in all, diversity efforts and inclusion efforts. A lot of times that's what it is. It's, okay, we have to do this. It really has to be a living, breathing thing that's part of the culture for it to work. And here's the upside of it. It will transform the workplace. If schools can start doing this, it will transform the environment. Let's just call it that, the environment, whatever environment, school or work. It will transform it. It will create it in a way that everyone's able to be their best. and be their best selves. And I think that's what we want. So I hope that companies will take it on like that. And I talk a lot about, creating the right culture. This is a big piece of it in a company. This is a huge piece of it.
It is, and it's so true what you're saying about a living and breathing, because it's got to emanate. It's got to be from the source. It's got to be foundational, and it has to be embraced by everyone, and that takes time. And I think sometimes in schools and in workplaces that can be difficult because the people at the top who are making all the decisions change, and all of a sudden, let's do it this way now. And so they abandon something that it takes time for these things to really get their, legs and to be able to grow.
Yeah.
And we have to be patient, right? Lay the foundation and then be patient. Stick with it because it will, just like you said, it's going to be worth it.
Yeah. Yeah, because it does have a benefit. It just has to be applied in that way. But I also think that, there's a lot of, I guess, bias. Let's just, I see it very clearly right now. Like, there's a lot of bias in a lot of things that have to do with embracing all diversity and inclusion. And unless it's brought in as part of the living, breathing values and culture of the environment. But the only way to do that is for each individual to be addressing their own bias about it. So, for example, a lot of people think people with ADHD can't be successful. A lot of them say, oh, they're not good with time, they're always late, all these stereotypes, right? It's the same thing with all the stereotypes that are out there. We have to get people, to these leaders and managers, to address their own bias about that, because that may or may not be true. And they're judging them from this norm, this societal norm, or this stereotype or label that's been kind of perpetuated. So how do you think that is going to be addressed or needs to be addressed?
Well, I completely agree with you, and I think it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. I think if we have that in our minds and we think, oh, this person, is this way, whatever the bias is, well, that's what you're, going to create, right? And so if you, I see it with children all the time in schools, if you accept the child and nurture the strengths, now, you're still talking about the challenges, but you nurture the things that they can do, they will rise to the occasion. Children are incredible, and they have that growth mindset if you nurture it. But it's the same thing with adults. You have to nurture these things in people, and you have to be open to, seeing your biases and really, like you said, working with them.
Yeah.
Working with them, because we all have them.
Yeah.
So if you say to yourself, no, I don't have them, well,
we all do.
Yeah, we all do.
We all do. The messages are there, and we're so programmed in every single thing, and things that we watch, things that we see, just people that we interact with, they're there. And so that also takes time as well. So, in a leadership, I have a leadership program. I think this is a critical part of leadership, because if you're not able to kind of get to know, just like a teacher, get to know how to motivate that individual, right? And that individual is going to need something different than this person or that person to their left or right. You really can't empower them.
Right.
So, I think there's work to be done for sure, but I think that education and people being willing or being expected to, that's like not just check the box. This is something that we need to do because this is going to be the outcome, and it's like mission critical.
It is.
Yeah. And the other thing that I wanted to bring up about workplace was, a lot of companies right now, and this came up in another interview I had, where I had this epiphany, and I might have talked about it on another episode, where some companies are really struggling to find people and employ people and hire people, recruit them. And there's so many things that are a part of that. It's a complex problem. But a lot of people, if they don't feel like their difference, right, or their way of being was honored and accepted, whatever that means, they leave. that psychological safe space that, I'm valued for who I am, my strengths, all of that, all of that. That's like a mission critical piece for businesses to kind of get behind this. And it means that if they don't, they're going to miss out on lots of individuals that are those out of box thinkers, innovation, problem solvers. What do you think about that? And what would you say to companies that haven't embraced that yet?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I think there has to be this level of openness to and to staying curious about what we don't know. In companies for sure, and in the workplace, being able to say, like we were saying, I have my biases, but being able to be vulnerable to perhaps not know, right? And I think many people, as they go up the corporate ladder, they want to know. I'm the authority. I know. But when we get into that, we box ourselves in and we cut off our, what's the expression, nose to spite our face? Not great with those.
Yes.
Because we're limiting ourselves. We're shutting ourselves off from those great out-of-the-box thinkers, those problem solvers, those people who see things. Many of them have ADHD, a diagnosis of ADHD, and they see things that others miss. And so I think it's critical that, we have people, in all levels of the workplace, but who really are open to staying vulnerable and curious about their employees, to see like what's going to motivate this person and what am I missing here with this person. But that takes courage.
Yes.
And hopefully that's where we're heading.
And it's, I see it very clearly, but it's really the same for teachers, right? If teachers, listen, I also know teachers have a very difficult, job right now. They're facing administration and they're facing parents and just all the things. But when I look at, with my own experience and with my son's, teachers that he's had, the ones that were good did exactly what you just said that an adult would do with people in a workplace. They got to know the person individually, what was going to be. Now, that can be difficult, yes. But the benefit of that is instead of just applying this one-size-fits-all and missing out on all of this greatness, in a company and in education, those are our future leaders of the world, right? Those are the future employees that are going to be going into the workplace. So being able to nurture that and let that strength grow, it's critical to be able to have that, and acknowledge that and have that approach.
And it's about acceptance.
Yeah.
Bottom line, it's about acceptance. It's about accepting the student that's walking into your classroom, getting to know them.
Yeah.
It's about accepting that employee that you've hired and getting to know them, all of them.
Yeah.
And, that takes time.
Yeah.
And I think that's often where it falls apart because people get stressed and anxious and there's no time and everybody's running around, and I get that. But in order to really grow, whether it's school or a workplace, we need to be curious and we need to spend time and be patient.
Yeah, it does take time.
With each other. So
one thing that I wanted to highlight was, and I'm going to ask this from the perspective of in education, what happens, because I know from my own experience and I've seen it, but what happens when all the things that are needed for either an ADHD child or a child that struggles with executive function, when that support that they need or that type of support that they need isn't there? What happens to them in school and their own journey?
When the support is not there, I think it can be really, really tragic. Because I think then the child starts telling themselves and shutting down, starts telling themselves that there's something wrong with me. There's clearly not a space for me here. And they start to become what I call the wounded learner. And they start to tell themselves, I can't. And then we're all in real trouble because just like we were just saying, we're missing out on the potential awesomeness of that individual. And if we don't nurture that child at that time, we're potentially missing some brilliance.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, of course, devastating for that child.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there's a lot of, a lot of challenge right now in the educational system
Yeah.
with this.
Yeah.
And having the support. And I think also we have to be really careful with, these COVID years,
Yes.
because in some ways it's like, oh, did that really happen? Like
Yeah.
now there's no masks, there's no, I
Yeah.
was in an airport a couple weeks ago and everything seems to be back to normal,
Yeah.
but it's not.
No.
These children particularly, but not just children, adults as well.
All of us, yeah.
It all fell apart.
Yeah.
And that can't just be switched on again.
No.
We have to understand that that is going to have ripples
Yes.
for a long time.
Yeah.
And we have to be patient with ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where, a lot of the work I do is with self-compassion.
Yeah.
And teaching, self-kindness. What have you done today that's going to be helpful to nurture you? What have you done today? Did you take a 15-minute walk in nature without a device?
Yeah.
Did you do a mindfulness sit for 1 minute? You don't
Yeah.
have to be Buddha on a rock.
Mm-hmm.
What did you do today
Yeah.
to nurture you?
Yeah.
And that's really important. And just like I mentioned earlier, as parents, our children are watching everything we
Yeah.
do. So if our message is, why can't you stop playing your video games? Am I walking around with my iPhone and checking
Yeah.
Facebook,
Yes.
for 2 hours a day? I get it. We're all addicted to some extent.
Yeah.
But what have you done to take care of yourself today?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and I also talking about what happens, right, and how you said it could be tragic and missing out. Like I mean, obviously, I know this well, right? Because I know that if that acceptance isn't there and that nurturing isn't there, I've seen it with my own eyes with my own son. That's like he's checked out, like he's checked out, the wounded learner. We learned about that with you, but I also think what you just described, that whole scenario, in the workplace, that becomes the employee that's checked out.
Yep.
That's not engaged. That's not really in, right? Because they feel like there's really no place for me here, and, I just can't be successful. And then that becomes a loss as well, because that person, unless they're, I've had it where I've had employees that came from somewhere else, and I've successfully brought their confidence back up, all of that, nurtured that, but that doesn't happen all the time, and they end up either leaving or just never tap into that strength or those things that they have, those gifts they have, because they've been meant to feel like they're not good enough, and they kind of put that on themselves. So I hope that's clear. Like, coming from the education world, it's the same. It could be tragic in education. It could be tragic in life. And that same scenario can happen in the workplace as well.
Absolutely. And I think, a big part of what I teach young people, I also teach adults in this program, which is that, is the self-advocacy.
Yes.
Because what I say to students, a lot will come out in our sessions, and they'll say, well, this teacher, I can't ask him for help because, he's this way or that way. And I'll say, I understand. Believe it or not, I was young once too, and I was very afraid to ask for help. But I said, it becomes really critical for you to work on asking for what you need, even if that person isn't exactly open the way you need them to be, because you will have a boss someday who might be like that. You may have a coworker someday who's going to be like that. And so I try to build those skills early, that certain things we can't be in control of. What can I control?
Yeah.
I can control me and how I advocate for myself.
Yes.
And I keep saying to students, believe it or not, you are the most important part of that school. And they look at me like, no one's ever said that to them. And I say, because without you, they wouldn't need me. I'm a teacher.
Right.
You are the most important part of the school. And I think we need to tell students that, to empower them, so that they can ask for what they need. And that, of course, ripples on to the workplace, where they then have those advocacy skills.
Yep.
And they can ask for what they need in the workplace.
Yeah.
But I think we all believe, oh my gosh, I don't want to stick out and look like I don't know what I'm doing. And I keep reinforcing the most successful people in the world are not the ones that walk in and get it. They're the ones who raise their hand and ask for help.
Yes.
Because they're not worried about what someone's going to think. They're
Yes.
worried about themselves
Yes.
and how to do a better job. And that comes across and they get further. But it's about nurturing that. So, even as an employer, being happy when someone asks you for help.
Yeah.
How do you receive
Yes.
How do you receive that? Do you take that personally, like, oh, this person's supposed to know that? Or do you say, maybe I didn't explain that well enough.
Right.
Let me try another way.
Right. And that's like a key element in leadership. Like being a good leader is being able to put, as a manager, putting the mirror back to yourself.
Yeah.
What can I do to improve this? What was my part in this?
Right.
Yeah.
But it all comes back to, like I said, that openness. The awareness,
Yeah.
the acceptance
Yeah.
of maybe I don't know it all. And isn't that more exciting to go through life with, I have a lot to learn?
Absolutely.
Because then there's a whole journey in front of me.
Yeah.
I love that about the brain because
Yeah.
there's so much we don't know about
So
the
much we
brain.
don't know.
Every day we discover something amazing.
Yeah. Well, I have to say to you that in my own personal journey, just understanding more, obviously going through the program with my son, with you, and I did as well as an adult, and I learned as well and learned things just about even just the shame and all of that has to do with being what's quote unquote not the norm and not fitting in, your whole thing of the lollipop head with the, education system. The people who do good in school are lollipop heads because their head is the shape of the door of the school, but we're not all lollipop heads, right?
No, we're not.
We come in all different shapes and sizes. But just understanding that and learning more about the brain and learning more about just because neurodiversity, like this term, has only come into my purview in the last, year or so. But we're all neurodiverse. Mm-hmm. All our brains are different.
Yep.
Neurodivergent is different than the quote unquote norm, right? If we could even call it. There's a myth of being normal, but what is expected, and that is so pivotal. It's so pivotal to understand, to have that compassion and have that curiosity to learn more about it. Because when we are programmed to, it's this way and this is the right way, you seem to follow that, right? And that's when you get closed-minded and you shut out everything else that isn't that. But understanding and learning that there can be many differences, and there can be differences that actually lead to really great things. Like look at all the inventors. If anybody listening who doesn't understand this or hasn't been exposed to this, look at all the great creators, or look at all the people that are out there that are the best innovators. A lot of them have ADHD, dyslexia, whatever. It's we have to challenge our understanding of that and the stereotype of that it's less than. It's not less than, it's different.
It's different. And that's where it's not learning disabilities, it's learning differences.
Differences, exactly.
Substituting that D word.
Exactly. Again, that pathological labels,
Yep.
they've done damage, and we have
Yeah.
to start to change the language about how we speak about it. Yeah, I am certainly just intrigued with all the things that there is to still learn. But tell me something about any success stories that you have, or examples of, just coaching, how that's made a positive impact on anybody, whether that's a child, adult, parent, with anything different than you've learned that has either ADHD or executive functioning challenges.
So one of my favorite stories in the last year, so I'd only been working with young people and their parents. And then a mother reached out to me maybe a year and a half ago, and she said, my daughter's in kindergarten. I was referred by a friend who you'd worked with, but that child is a little older and my child is in kindergarten. And I said, she's a little young, because in order to really understand, there's a level of self-awareness.
Yeah.
And she said, I have ADHD, I'm worried. She has ADHD, and my husband has executive function challenges. And I thought about it and I said, how about if you and your husband take the course? Because the things that you'll be implementing at home will affect your daughter, because there'll be a lot of things that she'll see. And as I mentioned earlier, you're such a model for
Yeah.
your child. And so they took the course. They were this wonderful couple and embraced all the techniques and strategies, and they were so wonderful. And at one point they said, you're saving our marriage.
Ah,
Because there were so many things that we were getting, upset about each other. And it all came down to executive functioning things.
Yeah.
It all came down to they needed solutions for things. Oftentimes in relationships, it's not the big things. It's the little things that add up, and then they drive you nuts, right? So she said, you should really think about working with couples because we just love meeting with you, and we want to keep meeting with you. So I actually have kept meeting with them.
that's great.
Just once a month to reinforce the things that they learned. And, I am a therapist, but in this case, I don't act as therapist, but it's certainly therapeutic.
Yes.
Because that's my background.
Yes.
I am a drama therapist.
Yes.
So all of this comes through, I think, in the work that I do. And I think that was a real success story. And I love when I learn about, my own process. And I thought, I would love to work with couples. And so that's what I'm starting to do now.
That's great.
Yeah. And more with adults. So
Yeah. I mean,
really
I think that, and I
exciting.
think also there's the timing, right? Like this is just not that like maybe you plan this, but like the timing is so perfect because I think, again, as we were saying, and I've been hearing a lot of this too, a lot of adults have realized through COVID and all of that, some of the struggles that they've been having, whether it's with their partner or whether it's with themselves or, their own challenges. And then, I could speak to you for sure, like it affects the family. I mean, it definitely affects the family, no question. And for any of you listening that, one of the things that I've realized is the person in your family that kind of has that time blindness where you have to tell them that they have to be ready 30 minutes before they actually do. Likely they have some kind of executive function challenge, right? So that's a real thing that impacts the family. And I think that, whomever it is that needs the support should seek it out because it can be a game changer.
It can really be a game changer. And I think also a big part of it now is, young people who are coming out of college and, possibly these COVID years were, obviously a real wrench in their plans. Now they're coming out and they're getting a job. And so really understanding like what's required in terms of executive functioning to be on time.
Yes.
How do I plan my, my day and my weekends, how am I going to shift from the college life to the job world?
Fitting it all in.
Yeah, fitting it all in. And so, all these things are really important to think about, and they can be game changers if you have a system.
Yeah.
So, that's...
But yeah, I love that, just the whole trajectory of, you working with families, but really the catalyst is children, but really having that impact with adults and now being able to serve not just children, like you said with this story, but also just any adult that has realized, many people through this whole last 3 years that, I really have to develop some skill in this area, or something for me that I think, and again, I don't have a diagnosis, but I could look to and reflect on through things that I've developed in my own life just out of survival, that it's something that I had to do in order to, whether it's get up or manage my time or be on time or get something done, just different ways that I had to do things were things that I developed on the fly, but would have been a whole lot helpful if I had that early on without that struggle,
Right.
So
Yeah.
I love that. So tell me a little bit more about not just with couples, how, or is it just not just with couples, you're looking to work with all different kinds of adults from all different angles?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, I really think that this, group of moving from college to the working world is a group of, young people that can really benefit from this. So working with companies on my end to say this could be part of an onboarding package.
Absolutely.
This could be a part of that growth, to make sure that they're successful in this transition, as well as companies who are laying off employees. This could be part of the exit package. We have to let you go, but we're going to offer you this executive function coaching so that you can make a successful transition to the next step. I work with a few adults now who are really unsure of what they want to do next. They really want to leave their current job or they've been let go, and it gets difficult. It's kind of like being in a black hole, right?
Yeah.
You can't really put one foot in front of the other. You need some support. And so that's where I think this work can be really effective as well.
Yeah, I agree. And I also think, people coming out of college or young people that have just been working, or in the workplace for a little bit, what a need there is there. Because I think generations that come before, and I've heard a lot of people in my generation and the one after me saying, like, oh, I should know this. If they're not exposed to this type of education, right, in their education. They're not learning this in school. Maybe they should. I don't disagree that they should be learning these strategies in school, right? But if they're not, or they're not modeled in the home because there's no awareness of this, how do they gain this skill that is, like you said, and we've said several times, life skills, fitting it all in. I can definitely say that is part of a transition into the workplace that is not acknowledged, meaning like you talk about, I think you said to me in previous years in school, they have to understand it's not a light switch. We turn it on, like just turn it on. It's a progression and it's a slow ramp up. It's the same for these adults coming out of college, transitioning into the workplace. I can look back on my own leadership things. It took a while for people to kind of just get on that ramp and be able to be successful and managing it all. And how do I manage my social life and money and, all of these things and be successful, especially if they haven't developed those skills.
Right. And I think, too, that understanding with, when you look at the brain and you start to see how our brains are wired differently, and you start to accept that, I have strengths and I have challenges, and those challenges I can use strategies to help me with them. And it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with me.
No.
But I need that support in order to be successful. And then there's, again, back to that acceptance.
Yeah.
Right? I can accept all of me.
Yeah.
Instead of, like you said, it's not flipping a switch. It's about growth. It's like, we talk a lot about little by little in the program, because this is not, I say I'm not a magician. I don't have a magic wand. I can't say a little spell over your head and you're going to have brilliant executive function skills. This is going to be about you wanting to make changes, right? And it's going to be little by little.
Yeah.
And if you follow these steps, you will see progress over time.
Yeah.
But you have to be patient. And I think that's hard in the world we live in, because we have, instant gratification. I can watch whatever show I want to watch whenever I want to watch it. When I was little, I had to wait until a certain time on Friday nights to see The Love Boat.
And if you missed it, you missed
exactly. And now, same with the phone. It's like the phone it's got everything in there. I love technology. It's amazing.
Yeah.
But it also takes its toll on us. We forget that sometimes we should put down those devices and just go be outside in nature.
Well, and the other thing too, just that all being a part of, your ability to be your best, right? Like I know even myself there's certain things in the workplace, even now, just, with just employees kind of managing the distractibility of this, right? And when I was coming up, we didn't have this.
Right.
So it makes it harder, but it's a skill that needs to be mastered, because you can't have your phone in your lap with the notifications on while you're working. Right. That's not going to set you up for success. So even understanding that, again, I think we assume people should know that. there's not real awareness, and I think that's critical to success.
And it has to be explicitly taught.
Absolutely.
It really has to be explicitly taught.
Yeah.
For people to understand that, and for people to be able to say no to themselves. It comes down to self-regulation.
Yeah.
Right? I love that, some of my clients love video games, but there has to be a time when you say, I'm going to shut it off now because I have to do my homework.
Right.
Right?
Those boundaries.
Yeah, it's boundaries, and it's sticking to those, being able to, and it takes time. It's not easy.
Yeah.
And I always say, you're not going to do it perfectly.
Yeah.
Right? So it's progress, not perfection.
Yes.
And not, every time we have a session, we do a check-in and a check-out, as you know.
Yep.
And that's that ability to land, building that metacognition,
Yeah.
that ability to pause and think and make a good choice. And we tend to just move through life, and then we say, oh my gosh, why did I do that? Or why didn't I do that? Instead, building in these pause points during the day, whether it's taking 5 breaths or sitting down, closing your eyes for 1 minute, that's your pause point. So you can land.
Let you check in.
Land and see, where am I?
Yeah.
How am I doing?
Yeah.
What do I need right now? Maybe it's as simple as I forgot to eat lunch, But if we move through our day and we don't stop, we're not even paying attention to what our basic needs are. Our basic needs are sleep, food, and exercise.
Yeah.
Those 3 things are going to help our executive functioning so much.
Yeah. And it's funny because there's a lot of talk, and I've been talking about this myself a lot on this podcast, but this whole grind and hustle mentality and churn, the way we work in this country, and the way, it's so normalized to work through lunch, to go on 4 hours sleep, which is so anti of what can be your best, of how you can be your best. And so obviously there's a lot of messages of the things that we're talking about right now, but it's understanding and embracing that. And that's also part of bringing that into the culture of, this is how we be our best, and this is how I be my best, and advocate for that. And also for companies and schools to acknowledge and embrace that, because the benefit is one that will show better productivity, better successes, better ingenuity, better innovation, all these things. And it's better health. Yeah, and better health. But I think, one of the thoughts, just in closing, but one of the thoughts that I had was when you were talking earlier about just this whole acceptance and, educating in companies, for example, the leaders, I think it's really education of all, right? Because I'm thinking about one particular instance where I was working with a partner company, and there was a new employee, and he was being trained, in this meeting, shown a process. And she was an older woman, but she was pretty much saying, oh, you're not taking notes, you're not taking notes. And she was an authority figure to him, she was above his position. And then on a follow-up, she said, oh, you may have to come back and train him again because he wasn't taking notes. And I had to say to her, you know what? Everybody learns differently. And that may be what you need to learn, but it might work for him to just look and watch. Some people can't take notes and watch and listen at the same time. And you know what? At the end of the day, when he finally had to perform it, he was fine. But it was the shame from this colleague, and yes, she was a higher position than him, but she wasn't his boss. So the ability for all people to understand that just because that's the way it works for you doesn't mean it's going to work that way for somebody else, no matter where we are, whether it's in the classroom, whether it's in the workplace, whether that's in society. I think that's really critical.
It is critical. Yeah, I agree.
And we have to keep having these conversations.
Yes.
So, Annika, before we close, I just want to encourage you to share with everyone. We are going to put in the show notes how to get in touch with Annika, more about the program. But just tell me, if you have a Facebook page, website, just tell us about the things that we're going to put in the show notes.
So, yes, you can reach my website at www.timewise.life.
Timewise.life. Love it.
And I don't have a Facebook page, but I have an Instagram.
Okay,
Just
excellent.
Timewise12.
Okay.
or the 12 hours of the clock.
That's it. I like that. Time-wise 12. So we are going to put all that information in the show notes for everyone. I want to thank you so much for joining me today.
It's great to be here.
This has been a pleasure.
Thank you.
I hope all of you have enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much for joining us. Go ahead and check out the show notes for more information on Annika and the program that she has available. I hope that you have enjoyed this, and we look forward to seeing you next time on the next episode of Finding the Upside. Bye for now.